At 27, I had spent 4 years learning how clothes changed the way people were seen. A softened shoulder can make a woman look approachable. A sharper waist can make her look certain. Ivory, under the right light, could look almost white. None of that explained why my sister was standing in my bedroom wearing the dress I'd bought for my wedding reception. I had come home to the second-floor apartment in Oakley carrying 2 garment bags for a client fitting the next morning. The front door was unlocked. I set the bags on the couch and walked toward the bedroom because the light was on and Vaughn was supposed to be across town confirming rental chairs. Coralie stood before the full-length mirror. She turned slowly from one side to the other, chin lifted, hands smoothing the satin across her hips. The ivory reception dress fit her differently than it fit me. She was 3 inches shorter and narrower through the shoulders, and the fabric bunched where it should have fallen straight. She did not seem to notice. Grandma Opal's diamond earrings hung from her ears. Opal had placed them in my palm that morning, wrapped in a square of flannel, and told me to keep them safe until the ceremony. Mom held her phone near her chest. Dad watched from the doorway with his arms crossed. They looked neither surprised nor embarrassed. Mom had used the emergency key I'd given her 2 years earlier after a pipe burst in the kitchen while Vaughn and I were visiting his parents. She had let herself in and brought Coralie with her. Nobody had called. Nobody had asked. "It looks better on me," Coralie said. Mom agrees. I stood in my own bedroom doorway and asked permission from no one before I spoke. It took me a moment to realize I had almost waited. Mom explained that I would still have my wedding gown for the ceremony and that Coralie only wanted one chance to feel beautiful after her breakup. She said it the same way she had said it about my designer shoes that came back with scraped heels. The vintage purse stained with foundation. The cashmere sweater stretched until the neckline hung below my collarbone. The worst one had been a one-of-a-kind designer sample the previous winter. I had signed it out from the studio to prepare for an editorial fitting with a state senator's daughter the next morning, and it was hanging on my garment rack at home. Coralie had worn it to dinner and brought it back with red wine across the front panel. I had to push the fitting back a day while a showroom in Columbus overnighted a substitute look. Blair Bancroft, my boss, pulled me from the lead assignment because I had failed to keep the original secure. She gave the credit to another stylist without raising her voice. Mom and Dad had called it an accident. I had let the family forget. Coralie smiled at her reflection. "Take it off," I said. She laughed and looked at Mom. "Take it off, give me the earrings, and leave my apartment." Coralie pulled at the zipper with one hand, yanking it sideways. I caught her wrist before the satin could tear and guided the zipper down slowly, one tooth at a time. She dropped Opal's earrings into my open palm and called me selfish. Mom raised her phone. I could not tell whether she had taken a photograph. Dad warned me that I was turning a small misunderstanding into a family crisis. He used his regional account's voice. Steady, a little disappointed, as though the real problem was my inability to see a reasonable offer. I held out my hand and waited until Mom removed the emergency key from her ring. Instead of placing it in my palm, she put it on the dresser, where she could pretend she was just setting it aside. I picked it up. They left. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed with the reception dress across my lap. The satin was unharmed. The earrings were unharmed. Something else was not. Vaughn came home 20 minutes later carrying a folder of rental confirmations. He found me in the same position. He examined the fabric first, checked the earrings second, and then sat beside me. "They entered our home, opened our closet, and put your sister in your wedding dress. You didn't overreact." Before he took off his jacket, he called the property manager's emergency line and explained how the spare key had been used. The manager approved a complete rekeying in writing and arranged for a locksmith the next morning. I put the dress in its garment bag and locked the earrings inside the fireproof safe Vaughn used for insurance documents. I believed the new locks would solve it. By the next afternoon, I understood that the emergency key had only been the beginning. The locksmith finished wrecking the apartment on Sunday morning. He replaced both the deadbolt and the knob, tested each key twice, and left us with 4 copies. The property manager kept one. I put one on my ring, one on Vaughn's, and locked the spare in the safe. That afternoon, we sat at the coffee table with the wedding binder between us, reconfirmed the cake. Chocolate layers, honey lavender buttercream, 3 tiers. The bakery had sent a final photo of the topper sample. Vaughn approved it without asking to see alternatives. He approached wedding decisions the same way he handled commercial insurance files: identify the risk, remove it, move forward. My binder still held a page for the father-daughter dance. Dad and I had chosen What a Wonderful World 4 months earlier, sitting in his car after Sunday lunch. He had hummed the first bar and I had finished it. I kept the page because I still imagined his arm beneath mine. The doorbell rang. Mom and Dad stood outside carrying a leather binder of their own. Vaughn let them in. Neither of us offered a key. Mom was 56 and had spent 20 years managing the front office of a dental practice. She ran the hospitality committee at the neighborhood community center. Appointment books, meal deliveries, holiday programs, fundraiser schedules. Once she placed something in a binder, she considered it final. She set her binder on top of my wedding notes and announced that she had found a fair way to celebrate both daughters. The plan gave Coralie an ivory gown, a separate entrance before mine, a small bouquet, a sister toast, several photographs with both daughters in white, and her own preparation room. Mom did not call Coralie a second bride. She called the role symbolic. We have 2 daughters and only one of them is being celebrated. Dad leaned forward. He was 59 and had spent almost 30 years in regional sales. Every refusal sounded to him like the opening position in a negotiation. When Vaughn rejected the second entrance, Dad did not hear a decision. He heard a number that could still move. He said Coralie had been struggling since the breakup, that the gesture would cost me nothing. Vaughn closed the binder and pushed it across the table. Merritt and I are the only people getting married. There won't be a second entrance or another woman dressed as a bride. Mom accused Vaughn of misunderstanding our family. I told her there would be no sister ceremony. Dad reminded me that they were paying for half the wedding and therefore deserved a voice. Vaughn pointed out that only our names appeared on the contracts. They left after warning me not to make a permanent decision while I was angry. Less than an hour later, the venue coordinator forwarded me an email thread. Mom had written to the venue requesting 2 preparation rooms, balanced photographs, matching flowers, and a private entrance for Coralie. The coordinator asked whether Vaughn or I had approved anything. I replied that there was 1 bride, 1 groom, and no additional ceremony. The coordinator confirmed that nothing had been added to the contract. That evening, my phone lit with an Instagram notification. Coralie had posted a photograph. She wore my reception dress and opal's earrings, and the light in my bedroom made the satin glow against her skin. The caption called it a final fitting for her sister's ceremony. Coralie managed social media for a boutique fitness studio. She knew how to crop an image, choose a caption that sounded effortless, and turn a private grievance into a public performance. Friends and relatives left confused comments. 2 of them asked whether Coralie was also engaged. I stayed silent in public. I took screenshots and sent them to Keely Pruitt, my maid of honor, who had known my family since college. Keely skipped the easier question of what I wanted to do and asked what I was willing to lose. On Monday evening, Aunt Enid came to the apartment. Enid was Dad's younger sister. She opened the family group chat our relatives had used since the previous December and showed me a message from Mom. Dated the same week I had ordered my wedding gown. Coralie's ivory gown is ordered. Don't mention it to Merritt until everything is settled. Enid said Mom had told the family it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission. The plan had not started with Coralie trying on the reception dress. They had been building it for months. Enid apologized for waiting so long. On Tuesday evening, Mom and Dad sent a joint message. The wedding for 86 guests was budgeted at approximately $24,000. Vaughn and I had planned to cover $12,000. My parents had promised the other $12,000 and had already paid $6,000 in non-refundable deposits. They now refused to pay the remaining $6,000 unless Coralie received a special role. Final vendor balances were due in less than 2 weeks. Vaughn opened our budget spreadsheet. We had $11,400 set aside for a possible move if his internal transfer to Hartford was approved. He said we could pay for the wedding ourselves. The money would have to come from somewhere. I looked at the father-daughter dance page and wondered whether Dad understood that he was putting a price on his place at my wedding. The ultimatum ended with 1 line: family should matter more than 1 day. For the first time, I understood that the wedding was not threatening the family. My refusal to surrender was. 2 days after the ultimatum, Coralie posted a video from the corner of her bedroom where she recorded content for work. The lighting was warm and deliberate. Her voice was steady. She said she had only wanted to share one small part of her sister's wedding. She said I had threatened to cancel everything over a dress. She tagged my personal account and the professional account I used for styling work. The video reached several thousand people. Its reach remained local, which was enough. It found clients, women from Mom's Community Center Committee, and an aunt in Columbus who sent me a paragraph about forgiveness and family loyalty. I muted them and stayed out of the argument. Engaging would have made me part of the content. On Friday morning, I styled Fallon Lockwood, a regional lifestyle creator I had worked with through 3 campaign shoots. Fallon trusted me enough to let me adjust a look without asking approval for every pin. She noticed my distraction because I pinned a collar a 1/4 inch lower than I usually would, and Fallon knew my work well enough to see the difference. She had seen the video. Instead of asking for details, she said she was sorry my private life had reached my workplace. After the fitting, Blair Bancroft called me into her office. Blair had owned the studio for 11 years. She rarely raised her voice. The expression she wore while showing me the comments beneath the studio's portfolio posts was worse than anger. It was calculation. Strangers had mentioned the wedding dispute under photographs of client work. Blair had turned off the comments and called the affected clients. One client scheduled for the next day had requested another stylist. She did not want her fitting connected to online family drama. I lost the client-facing assignment, the lead credit, and the chance to use the finished photographs in my portfolio. I know you didn't create this, Blair said, but the studio is still dealing with it. She never threatened to fire me. That evening, I drove 20 minutes to Grandma Opal Linwood's apartment at an assisted living community north of the city. Opal was 79. She had spent 35 years as an elementary school librarian, and her apartment looked like it. Books filled the shelves, accumulated beneath side tables, and formed careful stacks beside her armchair. I told her everything: the video, the lost assignment, the $6,000 ultimatum. She listened without interrupting. Then she told me about Aunt Della's wedding, 30 years ago. Mom had worn white. She had demanded matching flowers. She had inserted herself into photographs beside Della until Della asked her to stop. When Della objected, my grandfather had sided with Mom. Opal did not present herself as innocent. Your grandfather excused it and I let him, she said. Your mother learned that keeping peace meant somebody else had to surrender. Opal paid for her own apartment, her teacher's pension, the survivor annuity from my late grandfather's pension, and the money from selling her condominium covered the cost. Mom and Dad had no control over her housing, her care, or her decisions. Rather than tell me what to do, she asked whether I wanted to spend another 30 years waiting for my family to understand. On Monday morning, Vaughn received an email from his company. His internal transfer request had reached the final stage. The firm expected to make its decision within 60 days. The moving fund was no longer money reserved for a distant possibility. We met Greer Winslow at the venue that afternoon. She was a month of coordinator the venue had recommended. Greer had worked their events before and knew the staff, the private entrances, the preparation rooms, and which doors locked from the inside. She reviewed our approved guest list, vendor contacts, and copies of Mom's unauthorized requests. The venue confirmed that every future change required authorization from Vaughn and me. Greer arranged 2 event security staff through the venue's approved list. Lyle Fletcher, Vaughn's college roommate, worked in IT security. He came over one evening and helped us check recovery addresses, replace old passwords, and set up 2-factor authentication on every account connected to the wedding. Vaughn and I sat at the kitchen table and rebuilt the budget. We cut the floral upgrade, the late-night snack station, and several decorative rentals. The cuts saved about $4,200. Hiring Greer and security added $1,800. After everything was recalculated, we still needed $3,600 from the moving fund. The balance dropped from $11,400 to $7,800. Vaughn stared at the number on his laptop for a long time. We can still move if Hartford calls, he said, but there won't be much room for anything to go wrong. I nearly suggested giving Corley the toast and ending it. 1 toast, 3 minutes. Then the money would come back, the stress would stop, and I could keep the father-daughter dance. Then I thought about the lost assignment, the photograph taken inside my bedroom, and the ivory gown ordered the same week as mine. I authorized the payments. Greer confirmed that Mom and Dad no longer had access to any vendor decisions. Then she asked whether I wanted to remove all 3 names from the guest list immediately. I thought about Dad walking me down the aisle. I thought about the song. Not yet, I said. I had accepted losing their money. I had not yet accepted losing them. 12 days later, with 2 weeks left before the wedding, Mom invited us to dinner at the family house north of the city. The house was comfortable without being large. It was the result of Mom's steady paycheck, Dad's sales career, and their habit of paying off one thing before buying the next. The $12,000 they had promised for the wedding was substantial for them, but not reckless. They had planned it for years. Because they considered the money a sacrifice, they also treated it as authority. Mom served pot roast and spoke as though the past 3 weeks had been a misunderstanding reasonable people could now set aside. The dining table was set with the good china. Her wedding binder sat beside the serving dishes as naturally as the salt and pepper. Coralie sat across from me. Since the breakup, she had stopped posting photographs with friends and increased the beauty videos she filmed alone. At dinner, the confidence she projected online disappeared whenever Mom stopped speaking for her. She held her fork the same way I held mine, close to the tines, as though someone might take the plate before she finished. Dad cleared his throat and announced that the family had abandoned the separate sister ceremony. Mom's revised plan sounded smaller. Coralie would wear champagne instead of ivory. She would have one brief entrance, give a sister toast, and appear in a few special photographs. One entrance, one toast, a few photographs, Mom said. That's all. Dad added, it doesn't take anything away from you. The request was more dangerous because it sounded almost reasonable. Each item was small. Together they built a second ceremony inside mine. Coralie set down her fork. For the first time that evening, she spoke without checking Mom's face first. Mom said this was the only way the family would still have something to celebrate about me. The words hit a place I recognized. I knew that fear. I had lived inside it for years. The belief that there was only a fixed amount of family attention, and whatever went to one daughter had to be taken from the other. I understood Coralie's insecurity. Understanding it did not make the wedding hers. I told her she could attend as a guest. She could sit at the family table and appear in ordinary family photographs. There would be no entrance, no toast, no bouquet, and no white, ivory, or pale champagne dress. Coralie said she had returned the ivory gown. She said she had bought a navy dress. Vaughn stated the consequence without raising his voice. If anyone contacts a vendor again or changes any part of the schedule, they won't be part of the wedding. Mom agreed. The word came slowly, pressed flat. Dad said nothing. Before dessert, Dad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded index card. He had written, "What a wonderful world" on it in his careful sales report handwriting. He set the card on the table between us. I still want to walk you in, he said. I still want this dance. When I was 6, he had taught me to dance by letting me stand on his shoes in the living room. My feet had fit entirely on top of his. He had held both my hands and moved slowly enough that I believed I was leading. The card reached the part of me that still wanted to matter to my father independently of Coralie, independently of anything. I believed he would not give up that moment. As Vaughn and I put on our coats to leave, I noticed a garment bag hanging near the coat closet. The bag carried the logo of the bridal salon where Mom had ordered Coralie's gown. Coralie's name was printed on the tag. I asked what was inside. Coralie said the salon had also altered the navy dress. Mom had picked it up because the salon was close to her office, and Coralie said she would take it home after dinner. I thought about opening it. Unzipping the bag would have turned the evening into another confrontation, and Coralie had heard the condition. She had promised. I chose to give her one final chance. In the car, Vaughn asked whether I believed them. I said I wanted to. Through the dining room window, I saw Mom walk toward the hallway where the garment bag hung. The bag was opaque. The zipper stayed closed. The color inside was still hidden. On the morning of my wedding, Keely, Opal, and I arrived at the venue 3 hours before the ceremony. The building was a restored historic hall in Cincinnati with tall windows and original woodwork that the venue staff kept polished to a warm amber. A staff member escorted Opal to an accessible family room off the service hallway while Keely and I continued toward the bridal suite. Vaughn was already in the groom's preparation area. We had agreed not to see each other before the processional. Greer met us near the private entrance. Her expression told me something had already gone wrong. She had moved the arriving staff away from the lobby and positioned security nearby without alarming the early guests. Mom, Dad, and Coralie had arrived earlier than expected. They stood with the venue manager near the main entrance. Coralie wore the ivory gown from the bridal salon. The gown was not identical to mine. The neckline was different, the lace was heavier, and the hemline brushed the floor instead of pooling behind her. But the fitted bodice, the full skirt, the suggestion of a train made its purpose unmistakable. She carried a small bouquet of white roses. Mom had ordered it separately from an outside florist and brought it to the venue herself. Dad wore his suit and the boutonniere reserved for the father of the bride. Mom held the family binder and claimed they had brought only a few harmless additions. Coralie said the dress was technically ivory rather than white, as though the distinction fulfilled her promise. The venue manager confirmed that no sister entrance or toast appeared in the approved schedule. Greer reminded my family that every change required authorization from Vaughn and me. Mom said the family needed only 3 minutes before the bridal processional. Dad asked to speak with me privately, away from the staff. I did not leave the lobby. He told me he would not walk me down the aisle unless Coralie received her entrance. I looked at the bouquet, the ivory gown, and the binder they had carried into my wedding. After every warning, every conversation, every final chance, the argument was finished. They had understood every condition. They had understood them and come anyway, expecting that once they stood in the lobby on the morning of my wedding, I would surrender rather than face the cost. Dad waited. I did not give in. He removed the boutonniere from his lapel and placed it on the check-in table. Then find someone else. The boutonniere sat on the table next to a sign-in book and a cup of pins. A small thing. Silk flowers and a straight pin. I had pinned it to his lapel in my mind 100 times while planning the wedding. I remembered standing on his shoes. I remembered believing I was leading. I turned to the venue manager. Remove all 3 names from the guest list. Please escort them out before the other guests arrive. Coralie's composure broke. She looked at Mom and waited for the rescue that had come every other time. Mom said I was destroying the family over a dress. Dad said there would be no way to undo this. I told them they had been given a final chance and had chosen not to take it. I listed no past injuries and made no speech. Security approached calmly. They asked all 3 of them to leave. Coralie still carried the white bouquet when the doors closed behind her. I heard my parents' car pull out of the lot. My hands began to shake. Greer stood beside me and asked quietly whether she should remove the father-daughter dance from the reception schedule. I nodded because my voice was gone. I stepped into a service hallway where arriving guests could not see me. I pressed both hands flat against the wall. The plaster was cool under my palms. I counted the seconds between each breath the way I'd taught myself to do in high school, in college, in every room where I needed to hold together until the audience left. I had protected my wedding. I'd also lost the picture I had carried since I was 6 years old, standing on my father's shoes, believing he would always hold my hands. Opal came out of the nearby family room and found me there. She avoided easy assurances and stood beside me in the hallway until my breathing evened out and my hands stopped pressing the wall. Then she said, "Do you want my arm?" I said, "Yes." Grandma Opal walked me into the ceremony. She moved slowly because her arthritis made each step deliberate, and the pace gave me time to see the room clearly. The officiant used the opening Vaughn and I had approved. Nothing in the ceremony mentioned Coralie or the lobby. Vaughn saw Opal beside me and understood. He did not look toward the empty chairs where my parents had been expected to sit. He kept his eyes on me. I changed into my ivory satin reception dress and wore Opal's diamond earrings. The DJ removed "What a Wonderful World" from the schedule without an announcement. No one replaced the father-daughter dance with a performance or a speech. The reception continued. Our first dance, dinner. The chocolate cake with honey lavender buttercream that tasted exactly the way the sample had tasted 3 months earlier. Vaughn found me standing alone at the edge of the dance floor near the end of the evening. "I am sorry he made you choose," he said. I looked across the room at Opal, at Keely, at the people who had come to celebrate a marriage, rather than compete for a place inside it. 6 months after the wedding, Vaughn and I lived in a rented townhouse on a quiet street in West Hartford, Connecticut. His transfer had been approved 3 weeks after the ceremony. The company reimbursed the rental truck and mileage. The townhouse deposit, the first month's rent, utility setup, and 1 week of overlapping leases came from the remaining $7,800. I had given Blair 3 weeks' notice before the move. On my last day, she gave me written permission to use a selected set of campaign images in my portfolio. Our townhouse stood 10 minutes from Vaughn's Hartford office, and close enough to West Hartford Center for me to walk past the boutiques where I intended to rebuild my client base. The move had been tighter than we originally planned. The savings cushion was thinner. We completed it without calling Mom or Dad. By late October, leaves collected along the edge of the small lawn I was still learning to rake. Mom called occasionally. I answered when I had the time and the steadiness for the conversation. If she blamed me or returned to the wedding, I ended the call. If she talked about the weather or asked whether we had found a good dentist, I stayed on the line. The calls lasted between 4 minutes and 11. I had not spoken directly with Coralie. Opal proposed moving after Vaughn's transfer was approved. She toured 3 communities by video, chose one 10 minutes from our townhouse, and asked us to help with the logistics. The process took several months. Opal's age and arthritis made each step slower, but her years of cataloging library books had given her patience for forms, lists, and carefully labeled boxes. She remained responsible for her own finances and her own decisions. One Saturday afternoon, an Uber brought her to our townhouse and we sat at the kitchen table for tea. She said the distance from the rest of the family felt strange, but peaceful. She held her cup with both hands and looked at the bookshelves Vaughn had installed along the living room wall. Strange but peaceful, she said again, as though she wanted to make sure the words still fit. 2 weeks later, Fallon Mockwood referred a new client who needed styling while working in Connecticut. The referral came from the campaign shoots I had done for her in Cincinnati. It had nothing to do with the wedding. Once the client's deposit cleared, I rented a private styling room inside an established boutique in West Hartford Center. I checked the balance in my business account twice before writing the first rent check. The owner provided the reception desk and a shared fitting area. I brought 2 garment racks, my steamer, a pair of full-length mirrors, and the approved portfolio from my years in Cincinnati. The studio's client records remained there. The room fell short of a complete studio, but every decision inside it belonged to me. The following Tuesday, a package addressed in Mom's handwriting arrived. Inside was my childhood diary. I had not seen it since high school. The pages recorded years of missing sweaters, borrowed shoes returned stretched, birthday plans changed at the last minute because Coralie needed something first. Entry after entry described occasions when I had been told to let my sister have the thing I wanted because I was the stronger one, because I could handle it, because giving in was what good sisters did. A note fell from between the pages. I still don't agree with how everything ended, but we should have listened before it reached that point. The note stopped short of an apology. Mom still described the outcome as something that had ended rather than something she had helped cause. Even so, it was the first time she had admitted that listening might have changed anything. I placed the diary on a bookshelf where I could see it without making it the center of the room. Thanksgiving arrived 2 days later. Vaughn carved the turkey while Opal poured wine. 3 friends from Hartford brought side dishes and stayed to help clean the kitchen. The table seated 6. Every chair was filled by someone who had chosen to be there. My phone rang in the study while everyone was sitting down. My parents' number appeared on the screen. Opal met my eyes from across the table and left the decision to me. I silenced the call and walked back to my chair. Whether reconciliation was possible remained undecided. It would not happen on demand. Vaughn asked if everything was all right. I looked at the people waiting for me. Tomorrow, I said as Opal passed me the potatoes.